Okay, we're learning the Gemara. We're starting with Perek Asiri, 10th Perek of Elu Anechnakin. These are the people who get choked. Strangulation was one of the four punishments that are given by the Bezdin. Okay, so this is on page 84-2. Yes, quickly.
Just on my class I had earlier, he said killings only happen like once every 60 or 70 years. They
Yeah,
rarely happen.
it really happened. For a person to actually get killed by the Bezdin is very complicated. I'm not saying it happened only once in 70, but he said Rabbi Kiva said that if it was up to him, it would only happen. If it happened more than that, then it was considered a. If it happened too often, it wasn't a positive thing for the for the Bezdin to be doing. Okay, so let's just go further. So we're holding. So the Mishnah says like this: These are those who get. These are those who would get choked. Hamake avi v'imai, someone who hits their father or their mother. Punishment of hitting your parents is choking, strangulation. The goyniv nefesh Yisrael, if someone were to kidnap someone, punishment for kidnapping is strangulation. Zakin Mamre is a person who is a scholar, a member of the courts, but stubbornly holds to his own rulings and goes against the Bezdin HaGadol in Yerushalayim, the great Sanhedrin, in his rulings. So the punishment for that is also strangulation. So Zakin Mamre Api Bezdin. Navi HaSheker, a false prophet, Vahaminave, and someone someone who prophesies b'shem in the name of idols. Babal Eishesish, someone who has relationships with a married woman. Bas Koyenu Ba'ola, someone who is a team of witnesses that were found to be lying in the way of Eidizamim. So the punishment is that they get the punishment that they wanted to cause. In this case, if they were talking about the daughter of a Kohen, she would get burnt. And so the burning only happens to the young woman. It would not happen to the witnesses themselves. The witnesses themselves who were found to be lying, they would get strangulation, even though that they were testifying about something or a person, that she would get burning. So there's an exception to the rule. And also for the one who has relationships with her. So if someone has relationships with her, the Gemara doesn't teach us the limud, the person who has relationships with a daughter of a Kohen who's engaged, the punishment, who is married, the punishment is a strangulation for the male as well. So the Gemara says this: Mak aviv v'ima minal. And how do we know a person who strikes their father or the mother, the punishment is strangulation? Mak aviv v'ima maisumos. A person who strikes their mother or the father gets put to death. But it doesn't say the type of death that you get put to. Anytime it says just you get put to death without telling us the type of, or there's no limud, there's no wording like we've learned in the previous parakim that would hint us the type of punishment that they would get. So it's just death is by strangulation. Again, we're not sure. There's an argument if strangulation is the least or the second to least of the severe of the four in a way of severity of the four punishments, the four death penalties. So the Gemara challenges that. Because it says, "Call misa amur b'Torah stam any alachenik ema adekotale." At first, you may think that you are only going to get the death penalty for striking your parents if you kill them. It means that you have to kill your parents, God forbid. So the Gemara says, "Adikotle mikto shihargois." Yeah. So that only then you get killed. So the Gemara says, "Salkadaitach kotel chad." If you just kill a regular person, what's the punishment? The punishment is besayif, with the sword. And your father and your mother, you would get killed with choking. So that's only a question, meaning to say, so therefore we see clearly it's not about that you kill your parents, but you strike your parents even without killing them. So the question is, so the Gemara says, so maybe it means actually killing them. So we can't say that, because someone who you would kill, a regular person, you'd get the knife, you'd get beheaded, which is seemingly more severe than choking. And if you strike your parents, you only get choking. Hi, Bruce. We're learning we're holding 84 B2. Sorry, BA. We're holding the Mishnah of Elu HaNechnakim, these who get strangulation. So we listed off in the Mishnah the list of the people who get strangulation, and those were someone who strikes his parents, someone who kidnaps, an elder who is part of the court that disagrees with the court even after the rulings, a false prophet, someone who prophesizes in the name of an idol. It means the difference between a false prophet and someone who prophesizes in the name of an idol is clear. A false prophet is not saying necessarily something that he or she's not talking on behalf of an idol. He's just talking on behalf of God, but he's a false prophet nevertheless. God never told him to say or her to say anything. And the second one is someone who prophesizes in the name of an idol. Someone who has relations with a married woman is death by strangulation. And also the false witnesses, even in the case where the woman would be a Kohen and she herself would get burnt, but the witnesses get strangulation, even though we say that they should get the same punishment they're trying to cause. But we're going to see in the Gemara, they get the punishment that the man gets. They don't get the punishment that the woman gets. And we're talking about, like Rashi says, that a married bas kohen, but not an engaged. And an engaged daughter of a kohen, then she gets stoning as well. We've went through this Gemara before a few months ago. So now the Gemara says, again, we're going to start from the beginning of the Gemara. How do we know if a person strikes their parents, that's death by strangulation? So he says there's a verse. The verse says, if someone who strikes his mother or his father gets the death penalty. It doesn't say what kind of death penalty. And anytime the Torah just says a death penalty without giving a reason, so without telling us what type of death penalty, is strangulation. So the Gemara says, so you want it maybe in only until that he has to kill his parents. But if he just strikes them, he doesn't get the death penalty. So it says, if you kill a regular person, is besayif. Then the punishment is by sword. And if you're gonna kill your parents, it's gonna be strangulation. So the Gemara says, what's the question? That would only be a question if you are of the opinion that strangulation is the least severe of the four. Therefore, you could say that a regular person who you kill, you get the sword, which is more severe than choking. So that's a good question. Why would your parents be a less severe punishment? But according to the opinion, and there is such an opinion, that says that strangulation is more severe than beheading. So maybe the verse is coming according to that opinion. The verse is only coming to teach us that if you kill your parents, so you get an upgraded, more severe death penalty, which is choking, strangulation, which is more severe than beheading. But it would have to be in a case where you kill them. If you just strike them, then maybe there's no death penalty for just striking your parents without killing them. So the Gemara says no. Why? Because we have a verse that says that if you strike a person and the person dies, that the person you get put to death for killing someone. And then the verse says, there's another verse that says, and there's another verse that says, or if you strike him out of Ava, Ava is because you don't like this person, you have hate for this person. Shma Mina, from here we see that kol hechadi kaha kostam lav misahi. So from here we see that whenever there's just hitting someone, then it means without killing. Why? Because the pasuk clearly says, what's the pasuk say? The pasuk says that maka ish umeis, and it says oy be'eva hiko biyode v'yomus. So it talks about hitting someone, and then it adds that he dies. So if it doesn't say by the parents and they die, means that just hitting is hitting. Only when the Torah says if you hit someone and the person dies from the strike, so then that's a case of killing someone, and you get killed for it. So here we see clearly that just the word striking in the Torah does not include that you killed the person. Just striking alone is considered a strike, and in the case of the parents, it's punishable by death. Meaning to say, the Torah tells us by a regular person, non-parents, that if you strike them and you kill them, it adds the word and you kill them. They die from the strike. So the very fact that by parents it doesn't say and you strike your parents and they die, means to say that you're striking them even if they don't die, you still get put to death. So every time it says just hitting. It's not including that you killed him. The Gemara says like this now. We need the verse that says a person who strikes another person who mace and he dies or she dies, you get put to death. We also need the verse to say kol maki nefesh, that it says kol maki nefesh. The other verse says kol maki nefesh lefi edim. If there's witnesses, yirtzach es haretzeach, you have to kill the murderer. One witness is not enough. So we have two verses. One verse that says if you kill someone and they die. The other one says anytime you kill someone and there's witnesses, you get put to death. And the question is, why do we need both verses? So we have two verses that seemingly repeat itself. So it says, Maki ish remeis havamina ish devar mitzvah. The bar mitzvah, only a person who's an adult. It says Maki ish. So ish would be someone who's only in the age of 13 or 12 for a girl. So in katan loy, but a child, if you kill the child, you don't get put to death. Someone who's under the age of mitzvahs. Therefore, the Torah adds kol maka nefesh. Anyone you kill that is alive, nefesh means a live soul, you get put to death. So let's just say that first. So why do we have to add maka nefesh? The other verse maka ish v'meis ma'isumas. So if you only said the verse that if you kill anyone, what's in nefilim? Nefilim is, so in general, what we call a nefilim is like a stillborn or a non-live child. But obviously we can't be talking about a non-live child, because if it's not alive, then obviously you don't get punished for killing a non-live person. But here we're talking about nefilim is like this. That Rashi says a neifel in this case is that a person. It's an interesting halacha. I'm not going to get into this is not, obviously it's not permissible. The question is if you get put to death for it. So neifel is a kigoin. Rashi says bein teisha. The kid was born in the right time, meaning the child was born at 9 months, so at full term. He has such defects. The child has such defects in the body, like 2 spines or something really wrong with his head, that the child cannot live. I mean, basically the child would die, and you kill the child before the child actually dies. So that's you're not allowed to, but that's not included. That's not considered killing a live person, and therefore, because that person's surely going to die. Neifel means that, so usually we say Neifel is a stillborn, but here we're talking about it's not a stillborn, it's alive, but it's literally, there's no way for the child to live if it has 2 backs and 2 spines or a really defect in the brain, etc. Okay, I'm not gonna, again, it's not permissible, God forbid, but that's not, because the child's for sure going to die, it's not considered the murder to the extent that the bezin would put you to death. The other case is, or afilu ben shmaina, you would think halachically, this is another interesting halacha. Again, it's a complicated halacha. Halacha is that a child is considered, we know even in science, that a child born in the 8th month is very dangerous. So either there's the 7 months or the 9 months. There's two times a child to be born. In the 8th month is very dangerous. It's so dangerous that according to halacha, a child born in the 8th month is considered, unless the child will live out past 30 days, it's considered a problem child, and even if you kill that child, you're not considered. You won't get put to death for it. Again, you're not allowed to, but a ben shmona is considered pretty much a child that's not going to live. It's not. These are not. I'm not going to get into the laws here. These are not simple laws, obviously. And Taisus says. So Taisus goes into another law. So we're not going to get into that. So therefore the pasuk says, "Kol maka nefesh dikatzurach manamaka ish remeis avamin ish the bar mitzvah in katan loy." Katzur chemon for the Torah says kol maka nefesh, and if you kill anyone, even if it's a child. So let's just say the verse if you kill any live soul, Even those who are born and there's certain death, means the child is so unwell that it's for sure not going to live, or born in the 8th month also is a problem. So it's therefore we need the first verse to teach us that it has to be someone that's going to live. Okay, so therefore, that's the case. We went off topic for a little bit for the case of hitting someone, and when is that considered murder? Now the Gemara goes back to parents. So you may think that that even if they don't make a wound. Now this is a question that gets complicated. The complication of the question is if you strike someone and there's no blood, that's also a problem. For instance, when halacha goes into, the Rambam goes into, if you strike someone and cause them to go deaf, so the Rambam holds that that's considered murder because that's considered because they can't be a makkah without blood. If the person goes deaf, then it's considered a makkah because there's inner blood. But if you don't have any blood, chabura means there's no. Then maybe there's no. If you hit a parent lightly, right? You tap your parent. Maybe that's also punishable by death. A chabura means there has to be a wound. So how do you know even if there's no wound? If let's say then you can never get near your parents. What happens if you rub your parents? You knock your parents by mistake. Your shoulder hits them. That's also a strike. So what's the definition of a strike? The laws get very complicated. For instance, what happens if your parents need an operation? Let's say your parents need, you're the only one to apply something for them. The Gemara is going to challenge these, is going to ask these questions. Like if you're not allowed to do any wound to your parents, so you're not allowed to hit your parents in any other way. So that's very dangerous. What about the Torah means even if there's no wound? If there's no wound, that could be anything. It means anytime you touch your parents by mistake, if you tap them, that's also a hit. So the Gemara says, we learn hamaka avi v'imay eni chai v'achi esvem chabura. So it's Almatanam the Mishnah Abba. It says clearly in the other Mishnah that hamaka aviv v'imay. If someone strikes his mother and father, eni chayv, they're not considered chayv to be considered that they get put to death until they make them a wound. Amar kra maka adam maka behema. So it says like this. See, the Gemara's question is like this. We said before the verse that says "Maka aviv imay v'meis." If you hit your parents, you get put to death. Maka aviv imay meisuma. Sorry, you get put to death. So the Gemara first says maybe it only means if you kill them. So it says no, because anytime it says in the Torah Maka, unless it adds the word "and you killed them," means that you didn't kill them. And because it doesn't say that you killed your parents from striking them, means that you get put to death for just striking them. So now the Gemara has a problem, because if that's the case, how do you define what it means hitting your parents? Maybe it means anytime you touch your parents. Is it considered a hit? Who says it has to be a wound? Because there's nowhere in the Torah that says a wound. And we find the next Mishnah says, if you strike your father or the mother, until you make a wound. So how do we know that? But the verse doesn't say that. So he said like this, Amar Kra, we have a pasuk that says, Maka adam maka behema. If a person strikes, those who have the psukim, it says, this is a verse in Vayikra, it says, Maka behema yishal men. If you strike a animal, you have to pay for the damages. Maka adam yumas, if you strike a person, you get put to death. Okay, that's the verse that we have in Vayikra. So we have to understand what the verse is talking about. So the verse could be talking about many things. It could be talking about you strike the animal and it dies. It could be talking about you strike the animal, it doesn't die, you just damage it. And if it's only damaging, why would you get put to death if you kill a person? If it's the same verse. So we have to understand what the verse is talking about. So the verse says, the verse is Maka Adam Maka Behema. It talks about hitting a person and hitting an animal. And it says it in one verse. For the animal, it says you have to pay. And for the person, it says you get put to death. So what's it talking about? Ma Maka Behema, just like if you strike an animal. You're not responsible. You can't, if you just tap a horse, someone's horse, you don't get a fine unless the person has a sign, please don't touch my horse. But I'm saying that if you just touch someone's animal, nowhere, you don't have to pay for it, you don't do any damage. So you have to damage them. There has to be a chabura, there has to be a wound. By nefesh. Because the verse says, Maka behema, the verse before that says, Maka nefesh behema yishamenu. There's a verse before that that says that if you hit the soul, that means there has to be something alive there, that that you cause you cause damage. Maka adam, af maka adam, so to a person, which in this case we're talking about the father and the mother. You're not responsible to pay unless you've made a wound. Hold on, guys. I have to, because there's something wrong with my computer, so I'm running off my phone. And it looks like my headphones need to be switched. So 1 second, I'm just going to switch my device. Hold on. Let's see. Guys hear me? Bruce, hear me? Good. Okay. So we would think it says, so just like an animal has to be a wound, because it says, there's a second verse that says that maka nefesh behem yishamenu. So in the case of hitting a person, in this case, the person, what kind of person are we talking about? We're talking about only your father and mother. Because if you just hit a regular person, you pay. You don't have to, whatever, you have to pay. You don't get killed. David Chabur is also talking about in a case where you cause a wound. Okay, so we have a lot of verses that we're putting together as a hekesh to build the case of what is the prohibition about hitting your parents. Number one is it means hitting them without killing them. Number two is it means you have to cause a wound, not just by hitting them without any kind of wound. Okay, so we've built the case based on the comparison of different verses to understand when striking someone is what you're obligated for, and therefore we'll apply it towards hitting your parents. So the bottom line is, even if you don't kill them, you get put to death, but only if you cause a wound. Okay. Maskav Lev Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah now asks a question. El Mi'at, if that's the case, so Hikhisha Bavonim, let's say on an animal, you kill it by overexhaustion. If you're saying that an animal only gets put to death if you cause a wound, what happens if you load on the animal, that animal can only carry 100 pounds of weight, and you put on so much, hechisha means you weaken it with stones. So you put on so much weight, you put on 500 pounds on the animal, and the animal collapses. Because you didn't cause a wound, you didn't hit it, you caused it to death by overstocking it. Although I'm not sure how when it dies because something breaks, obviously. But in theory, he's saying hachinami d'lei mechayiv, you shouldn't be mechayiv. So the Gemara says like this. No, so clearly means striking an animal any kind of way that causes it damage, even if it's not a chabura, a major blemish. If you don't cause a wound with blood, you're still responsible to pay. So what does it mean? Nefesh behema. So why does the Torah tell us nefesh? So you may nefesh behema if you're not going to use the word nefesh. So we've learned this rule in Talmud before, that sometimes you have a verse that says something, and if you don't have, you don't need to apply it to the subject at hand. You could borrow the subject for another subject. So this Gemara says, if it's not talking about, you're not going to, it doesn't need to teach us about the soul of the animal, because even if you overstuff the animal with weight, you would also be responsible. Because even if you don't cause a blemish, but you cause it to die by exhaustion. So so we'll apply it when it says nefesh adam. In the verse that says maka behemi shamenu, maka adam yumas, means nefesh. So use the word nefesh, it has to be a chabura. Okay, so again we're building that the only time you get put to death for hitting your parents is if you cause a wound. So the Gemara says, now the Gemara asks another question. It's a technical Gemara. I just want to say that the reason we're going a little bit fast is because we're holding in the point of our class that we would like to get to chapter 11. Nothing against chapter 10. But the thing is that in the Mishnah it's one of these interesting things. The Mishnah a lot of the Mishnah is that if you would open a Mishnah, you would see that chapter 10 is actually the chapter we want to get to, which is the laws, is this Perek Chelik, which is talks about the depth of the world to come, and it's all the Gemaras that talk about the days of Mashiach and different peoples and the resurrection of the dead. It's a very, very famous Gemara. There's even a special foreword written by the Rambam on this, on Perek Chelik. So in the Mishnah, Chelik is chapter 10. and the chapter we're learning now is 11. But the Talmud switched it around, and the Talmud put that in the Vilna Talmud. They put in the printing of the Vilna Talmud. They put in chapter 10 to be the laws of strangulation, and chapter 11 is Perek Chelik. So even though the Ran and there's other commentaries that question the order, we're going to go according to the order of the Vilna Gemara, but we're going to go a little faster. So we could actually eventually, we started learning Sanhedrin a few years ago just to get to Chelik. So we're going to try to get there a little faster. Okay, but we're not missing out any major information here. So we have basically we built from a team of verses to understand the bottom line law is striking your parents is only considered you get put to death if you strike them in a way that causes a wound. So the Gemara asked a question then. If you're just applying the words of excuse me, if you're just applying the words of nefesh, that's by behemoth, that's not needed because even if you don't cause a wound, if you exhaust the animal to death, you're also responsible to pay. For instance, if you, it's not just an animal, right? If you rent a car and you drive it to death, you pop all the tires, you carry too much weight, whatever. You're responsible. You can't say I didn't crash the car. You didn't crash the car, but you can't rent from those days. People would rent a horse and buggy. You can't rent a horse and buggy and expect the horse to exhaust the horse. So it's a story actually. There's a story told I think about the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Marash I think it's the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Marash had to get somewhere very very fast. Something was an emergency to get somewhere for Klal Yisrael, for the Jewish people. So he had a horse rider. His name was Ivan. Ivan the Balagola, the horse rider. So the wagon driver. So he told him that he has to get there very fast, hit the horses to run very fast. Even if the horses would die, don't worry about it. That's how important it is to get there fast. I'll pay you for your losses. And it says that they rushed the horses to the extent that the horses died of exhaustion, and the Rebbe Marash paid, because if you cause someone to, even if he didn't hit the horse, but the horses ran until they dropped dead. So you can't. That's also considered you responsible for the financial loss. So then the Gemara asks just a technical question. If we already have the verse that says nefesh, we apply it, so we know. Why do we have to be makish? Why do we have to say the answer before that we compare an animal to a person to an animal, that it has to be that it has to be a wound? So the Gemara answers the Tanya Devei Chizkiah, like we learned in the yeshiva of Chizkiah, that said, we learned before in page 79 too, that it says that that the reason we compare it is to say that it says hukish adam lebehem, just like an animal. If you hit an animal by mistake, you didn't mean to, right? I didn't mean to put so much weight on the horse. That doesn't. Nevertheless, you still have to pay. Tamin Chayv, you have to always pay damages. So too, a person, you don't pay money, even if you did it by mistake and there's no death. It means if you strike someone and there's death, so you don't pay money, because we don't have monetary and financial at this monetary and monetary punishment or fine and the death penalty as well. But if you did it by mistake, so you're not going to be put to death, so maybe you think you pay monetary damages. So the law is no. So therefore, that we compare it to say that just like by animal, the law of the animal is whether it's intentional or non-intentional. So too, the law of hitting a person, whatever that law is, it's whether it's intentional or non-intentional. And we're talking about you strike a person, you kill them by mistake. So you would think that you would have to pay to the family a monetary cost. There's no monetary cost, because if you would have killed him on purpose, he would have been put to death, and you can't have a capital and monetary punishment together. Okay. So the Gemara says, Hanich Laman de Islay. That's only according to the people who agree with Chizkiah, that you wouldn't pay a monetary fine if you strike someone and kill them and you did it by mistake. Laman de Leslay, but the person who disagrees with Chizkiah and holds that you do have to pay a monetary if you strike someone by mistake, because you're not getting a capital punishment, so at least pay a fine to the family. So why do we compare animal to person? So the Gemara answers, Ma just like an animal, let's say you're a veterinarian, right? So if you're, again, the same question, a veterinarian, a person who takes care of animals, and the vet has to draw blood from the animal for its healing.
So you can't come back and say, well, you've caused a blemish to my animal. Now you have to pay me a fine. Doesn't work like that. Because if he's acting as a refuah for healing, so potter, you don't have to pay any monetary loss. So to a person, let's say, God forbid, you have to get chas v'shalom a limb amputated, right? So the Torah says if you amputate someone's limb, you have to pay the value of the limb. What does it mean, the value of the limb? The Torah tells us, we learn in Mishpatim, that tooth for tooth, eye for an eye. That how much if you cause a person to lose an organ, well, hold on a second, Aaron. If you cause someone to lose an organ, we value that person. How much was that person worth with the hand, without the hand, and that difference you have to pay for them. So let's say you amputate someone's hand for medicine. You could think later the guy could sue and say, "Well, you amputated my hand and you caused me a damage, even though he did it for refuah." Yes, Aaron.
I heard for a parent though, you can't even draw blood, so you have to get a doctor.
That's
So
the
is that
next. That's the
true?
next subject. We're
That's
getting there.
oh, I
We're getting
jumped.
this. You
Okay.
jumped ahead. But so therefore, we learned that just like an animal, if you cause a wound, but in a way of healing, so there's no monetary obligation. So to a person, the person can come back later and sue. Now, I'm not going into Bruce, you're a lawyer. I'm not going to go into if there's malpractice, because if you do malpractice, then that's not refuah. You did a mistake. You amputated someone by mistake, or intentionally, or you did something wrong. So then you did cause damage. Then you have to pay. But I give an example. I had a friend a year ago who's a younger guy, and he's sitting shiva for his parents, for his mother. His mother passed away. So I asked him. I said, how did your mother pass away? And she had diabetes, and the hospital insisted that she go through an MRI. And he said she wasn't able to lie on her back horizontal. She had to sit up. She never lie down, and because lying down would cause her to have a problem with her breathing. And they said, no, 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 it's just a few minutes. Quickly, she'll be fine. And she said, please, please, I can't breathe. And she ended up dying on the MRI in the MRI machine. That's malpractice. That means that they were trying to do refuah, but she said she couldn't breathe, and she died from she had a condition that she couldn't go into the machine like that. So either way, but in a regular case of medicine, you can't come back and sue for if they did everything the way they should. Okay. Now is the question that Aaron addressed. What about drawing blood for your father? Drawing blood was a way of healing. They used to do it more often back in the day. So what about drawing blood for your father? You're a doctor. You're a nurse. Are you allowed to? You're doing a chabura. So the boilu, they asked a question like this: Ben mahu shiyakiz dam aviv. Can a son draw blood for the father? So Ramasna Amar, you're allowed to. Why? Because the verse says, you have to love your friend like yourself. And that just because your father's your father doesn't mean that you're going to let them die or get sick because you can't draw blood from them. There's no such thing. We have a clear verse that says that if you're doing something out of love, it's not spiteful. You're not hurting your father. You're trying to help your father. Like Rashi says, Rashi says, el davar the Rashi defines what does it mean to hurt someone. This is a bit of a tricky answer. Why is it tricky? Because you have people who hurt themselves. So the Ramasna says, the Torah says you have to love someone like yourself, and just like yourself, you would give blood for yourself if you needed medicine. So too, the Torah doesn't prohibit you to do something you wouldn't do that you would do to yourself for a good reason. What happens to certain people that do things to themselves for a bad reason? So it has to come out of for a good reason. It has to be a positive. You can't say, well, I'd be hard on myself, so I'm being hard on you. That's not called v'ahavta l'recha kamoicha. A person says, the Torah says I have to love someone like myself, and I give myself tough love, right? I'm very hard on myself, so therefore I'm going to be hard on my children, and hard on my wife, and hard on everyone in the synagogue, because that's how I hold myself to a high standard. So I'm going to hold everyone else to a high standard. That's not called loving everyone like yourself. That's called being excuse my language. That's called being a jerk, right? So v'ahavta l'recha kamoicha means to be nice. You have to love. It's coming from a positive place. So that's Rav Masna says, but he applies the verse to teach us that just like you would do it to yourself in a positive way, you would also allowed to help your father or your parents. Rav Dimi Bar Chanina says another proof that you're allowed to. It says Maka Adam Maka Bema. We learn we compare a person to striking an animal. Maka Behema l'refua pater. Af Maka Adam l'refua pater. Also, for a person you're allowed to, for medicine, you're allowed to. And because it's, we said before that that verse is talking about that that if you hit the father and it's not for medicine, it's you get put to death. So that verse is talking about your parents, not any person. So too, just like an animal, so to man that's referring to in the pasuk. That in this case, it's talking about your parents, because if you just strike a regular person, you don't get put to death. So is also for refuah is mutter. So there's an argument between Reb Dimi and Ramasna. How do we know? The bottom line is you're allowed to. There's no one who says you're not allowed. However, we're going to learn a Ma'aser Rav. What's a Ma'aser Rav? The Gemara brings us two opinions that proves from the Torah that you're allowed to draw blood from your parents if it's in a way of healing. However, on that comes a Ma'aser Rav. Rav, which was a sage in the early generations of the Talmud, Leishavik liberia lemishkale sulya. He wouldn't let his son take a splinter out of him. Right? If your parents get a splinter, and if you take out a splinter, sometimes a drop of blood could come out if you take out a splinter. So he would never let his son take a splinter out from him. Mar Berei de Ravina, the Mar, the son of Ravina, Leishavik Librei, he didn't let his son Lemiftach Le Kavase, he didn't let him open up a boil, because also there's moisture and comes out the liquids, and that's like a wound. So even though we see clearly that there's even though that we see that that the Torah has psukim that says you're allowed, but they were careful and they still would not let. Dilma chavil v'havele shigyas iser. So he says, because maybe when he does it, he's going to make a chabura, and when he does a chabura, he does a wound, then it's going to be like a shoygig of something that he could have been put to death. So the Gemara says like this: if you're so concerned, I mean, the Gemara is not subscribing to these two cases of Rav and who's the other person? Rav and Mar Brei de Ravina. Why? Because they say that if you're worried that they're skimming on doing something forbidden, so any person you shouldn't be able to heal someone else, because maybe you're going to cause a wound. Means what? It means if you're allowing a person, a regular person, to heal someone, so then you have to let your parents, like we have a verse, we have to recha kamaycha, we have a maka behema, just like you're allowed to heal an animal. Why can't you heal a person, even your parents? So he says like this. So acher nami. He says acher shiyas lav b'nai. Someone else, if they do it by mistake, if they draw blood too much, right? The problem is, what's the concern with the son? The concern of a son is that, like we have the case in the malpractice. So at the end of the day, it's no. I don't know the laws. Bruce, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but unless if someone's on the operating table and someone dies because of something that the doctors or nurses did wrong, they get fined, they could lose their license. I don't think they get put to death for that or go to jail unless it's an extreme case, right? Because people make mistakes. So someone.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, so I'm saying, so you don't get put to death. So here, for the Gemara says, when it comes to a regular person, what the prohibition is a lav. You've done a damage, you've hurt someone, so it's a lav, it's prohibition. But if it's your son, if it's a shogeg, if they do it by mistake, if they do something too much, chenek, he's skimming on something that he could have got choked for. He could have got put to death by strangulation. So therefore, these rabbis were more careful with their children, even though that in theory they should be allowed to do it, because we have to loves your parent, love even your parents like yourself. But nevertheless, because it's such a prohibition by a child of death, they'd rather the children not do any operations or any kind of things on them that would, maybe cause them to draw blood. And this that we learned, we can do one more little case and then we're going to call it a day. It says, and this that we learned, that that machat shal yad, that a person who has a needle, like a needle that you use to sew. So the question is that it's on Shabbos that it's you could carry it even though it's meant for something forbidden. You're not allowed to sew on Shabbos, so it should be considered muksa. You're allowed to touch it because little bias akaitz, because maybe you need it for something else. Because a needle, like everyone knows, right? What happens when you're a kid? What happens when the kid gets a splinter? Your mother takes out a thread, a needle. You sterilize it and you use the needle to poke out the coats. This was something they were doing in the Talmud's times. So even though Shabbos you're not allowed to sew, but if you have to take out the coats. So lechesh dimachava, maybe it should be muksa because maybe you're going to cause damage. And then it's something that you could get skila for, because if you make a wound on Shabbos, you could get put to death for that. So over there he says hasam mikalkalhu. Over there he's not looking to do damage. He's looking to get rid of. He's not looking to cause something positive. So therefore, even if he did it by mistake, he wouldn't get. Even if he did it on purpose, he wouldn't get skila, because the law is only if you do something proactive on Shabbos. But if you destroy something, mikalkal is to destroy something. So then that's not considered a malacha, something that is forbidden on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do it, but it's not considered punishable with death. But that's not according to all opinions. A person who does damage on Shabbos, you're potter, not mutter. You're potter. It's forbidden, but it's not punished by death. But according to the opinion that says, what are you going to say? So why could you touch a needle thread on Shabbos? Goes hold on, let me see how much further the subject goes. Oh, we're finished right here. So the Gemara answers, Man Shamislai, who's the person who holds? The Amr Mekalkal B'chabura Chayiv. If someone who does damage by making a wound on Shabbos, you still get the death penalty if you do it on purpose. That's Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon Amr, and Reb Shimon says that we're holding page 85, 1. But if you do damage, you hurt someone in a damaging way, but not looking to accomplish something, mekalkel, so you're still chayiv. But nevertheless, it's when over here when you're drawing blood, you're not looking to draw blood. You're looking to get the splinter out. So the drawing blood is not something you're looking to do. So it falls under a different category of a reason you wouldn't be obligated on Shabbos, because on Shabbos we have two things. One is mekalkel. Mekalkel is a person who does something that's damage. That's mekalkel. That means you're ruining something, not damaging. You're ruining something, right? If you ruin something on Shabbos, that's not considered a malacha. A malacha means something you've built. You created something. We learned the prohibitions of Shabbos from the Mishkan, from the tabernacle. They were building the tabernacle. But if you're destroying something, that's not considered a malacha. That's not considered an action that you get stoned for on Shabbos. But according to Rabbi Shimon, you do. If you cause damage, you make a wound in someone on purpose, that's considered, and you draw blood, that's on Shabbos considered chayiv. But that's only if you're looking to draw blood. But over here, you're not looking to draw blood. You're looking to take the splinter out. So even though you're surfacing on something that could be forbidden on Shabbos, but it's even according to Rabbi Shimon, you wouldn't be put to death because you're not looking to your intentions is not to draw blood. Your intentions is either to get rid of the boil or to get rid of the splinter. So again, the bottom line is from all of what we learned, that just to make a summary of today, and next week we will start from the new case. If a person, we learn next week about the laws of someone who has a job in the courts to be a court agent. Is a person allowed to be a court agent to his parents? That part of the job would be something on behalf of the courts that would be damaging to his parents. Let's say the courts say you have to hit someone. So you could say, it's not me hitting my father. I'm just an agent of the courts. So then that's the question the Gemara is going to deal in next week. But just to make a summary of this week's class, we've learned about that if you strike your parents, so it has to be a strike that is a chabura. It has to be a wound. You can't just stop by touching your parents. But even if you don't kill them, if you just strike them and you cause a wound, it's punishable by strangulation. At the same time, we've learned that if you draw blood, even though seemingly drawing blood from your parents is something that's forbidden, but if it's in a way of healing, we have either the opinion of Rab Masna or the opinion of Amar Rab Masna or Mar Bachanina, Rabdimi Barchanina, that says that either we learn from V'hafta L'Recha Kamoicha or a verse, but they both agree that healing your father or mother even if it's causing a wound, even if you have to operate on them. If there's no other option, it's permissible. Nevertheless, we have a Ma'aser Rav that Rav and Rav Masna were careful not to do it, and because they was concerned that it's skimming on something that is connected to a death penalty, and therefore they would rather another person operate on them, because even if they do something wrong, it's just a prohibition. Whereas if you've done something wrong to your parents, like malpractice on your parents, it's kind of bordering on something that could be punishable by death. So therefore, it's always best to not use a child to operate or do anything on the father or mother that could be connected to drawing blood. Better someone else, even though someone else who does mistakes is also not permissible, but at least it's a prohibition, not something that's punishable by death. And we build a case basically for all these opinions. So this is the bottom line. And again, next week we'll learn about Rav Shesh's question about agents who are working on behalf of government officials. What is their what is the law when it comes to their parents, where they would have to do something that could be contrary to the law of hitting their parents, etc. We'll learn about that later. Hitting or embarrassing their parents, etc. Not being respectful to their parents, etc. Laila Tov, everyone, and have a good week. Take care.